Growing calls to defund the police across this country. New York State Senator Julia Salazar and former Obama DOJ spokesman and Hillary Clinton press secretary Brian Fallon also in this shortly worded tweet, defund the police from him. And now LA Mayor Eric Garcetti is promising cuts of up to $150 million from the LAPD budget and reinvesting those funds into communities of color. He says, watch this.
I want you to know we will not be increasing our police budget. How can we at this moment? Our city, through our city administrative officer, identified $250 million in cuts so we could invest in jobs, in health, in education, and in healing. And that those dollars need to be focused on our Black community here in Los Angeles, as well as communities of color and women and people who have been left behind for too long.
Here now, Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor, and Stacy Washington, co-chair of Project 21, syndicated radio host and daughter of an Army police officer. Welcome to both of you. Stephanie, welcome. And tell me what your reaction is to what Mayor Garcetti says in that moment.
Well, I think there's a huge differentiation that we have to make between funds that go to policing, that's a public health and safety issue, and funds that need to be allocated for, jobs or programming for certain communities. To say that we need to defund the police completely ignores the fact that criminals are actually waiting for an action like that, and the people in that community will be the ones who are primarily harmed by that defunding. So it's lunacy. I can't even believe he suggested it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing interviews with moms in Chicago who were horrified at the pullback of police after brutality stories created an environment, Andy McCarthy, where police felt that, that I think in some cases they were holding back. They were afraid they were going to get in trouble if they did their job.
Yeah, well, that's what happens, Martha, when the police don't feel like they're being backed up by their political leadership. And I think part of what's going on here, and I feel like I'm dating myself when I say this stuff, but I grew up in the Bronx in the 60s. So I was a kid in New York in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. That was a very different time in America than the relative domestic tranquility that we've had for the last generation. There's been a kind of revolution in policing that led to a real significant drop in crime across the board. And I think in a lot of the living memory or the adult memory of a lot of policymakers today, they don't understand how easily it could go back to the bad old days. That's number one. And number two, I think we really have to attack the premise of this whole idea that there's institutional racism, whether it's in the police department or other major institutions. I would just simply say, I was a lawyer for a very long time in the criminal justice system. Who runs the criminal justice system? Progressives, progressive lawyers. Who runs the institutions of opinion in America? Progressives. Now, I'm not a progressive, but I don't doubt that they believe what they say about racial equality and progress. Does anyone really think that they would tolerate systematic racism in the institutions that they run? It's ridiculous.
Stacy, that's what everyone across the country is being told, that it's systemic, that the racism exists in institutions in the police department, that it is not safe for young Black men to go outside, that they, are in danger every day of being brutalized by the police force. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, the statistics don't actually support that assertion, Martha. The fact is, a white person is 2 times more likely to be shot by a police officer than a Black person is. So this is a Democratic talking point that they gin up during election years. And that, I'm not saying that to take away from the death of George Floyd. He was killed. He was killed unjustly. We all watched it. We were all horrified. It was a moment of utter unity for America when we all cried out for justice for him. But now that they've all been arrested and charged, they've all been fired, we have to wait for the actual wheels of justice to turn to see if Keith Ellison and others who are going to prosecute can actually bring those charges successfully and put these men behind bars. But while that happens, what about the communities? What about the black police officers who've been killed? What about Mr. Dorn, Chief Dorn, Captain Dorn, I should say, an amazing man, 77 years old, retired, killed and died on Facebook Live, 77, snuffed out way too soon. He was in retirement after a successful career. So, Martha, I want to look ahead. What happens to these burned out cities? Who reinvests in those? Who gives the jobs back to the black communities that have been burned out by Antifa and these so-called peaceful protesters? Those are the questions that we need to answer right now.
Yeah, good questions. Andy, last question to you. Just referring to this piece by Dan Henninger today, who basically is making the argument that the Great Society programs failed, and that now he argues in the Wall Street Journal that there are excuses being grasped for to explain why, and that is why there's a leaning on some of these ideas that we're discussing here tonight.
You know, I think Dan has that exactly right. I've been trying to struggle myself with where this all went wrong. And I really think, Martha, when I was a kid, the message that I got growing up in the schools in the city was that just because something was on a page didn't make it true, and that you had to make up your own mind and analyze things and be rational. And at some point, we went from that to it's true because I tell you it's true. And I think when you get there, you lose your ability, we lose our ability as a society to have a common understanding of how you get to facts and how you get to reality and how we can get to a point where we can actually have a discussion and see what we agree on and work on what we don't agree on. We're not even close to having that yet.
Andy McCarthy, thank you very much. Stacy Washington, great to have you with us this evening as well. Thoughtful conversation, and I hope it continues to lead us all to a better place. Thank you very much.